I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. Steve, I'm going to tell you a little story about my weekend, and we'll talk about emotions and recovery. There's a lot to unpack with this story, and I was really surprised at the emotion that I had with something this weekend. My girls, I might have talked about this on the podcast, my two girls, who are 10 and 9 on a weekly basis, go to a farm, and they ride horses, and they get this whole horse experience there, where part of their duty is part of the experience is to do the chores. Wash the horses, comb the horses, clean the stalls, get the food in, get the dung out, and then they learn to ride. They do trotting and cantering and all this type of stuff with the horses. One of the horses there is my middle daughter's favorite, Holden. Holden is a smaller horse. Holden was 29 years old, and it was really the Jerry West of the farm. It's the logo for the farm. And Annelyse really loved this because Annelyse has some pretty significant anxiety, and Annelyse always felt very safe with Holden. And Holden got Cushing's disease, which is horse diabetes. And we also found out that the horse had dementia. And my question for my wife was, how do you know if a horse has dementia? And apparently it's easy to tell. The horse doesn't react. It gets spooked when it never would. It doesn't seem to recognize you. There are those things that are just way off, and all these things were happening. And there's medicines for Cushing's, but Holden wouldn't take it as medicine. And Holden continued to lose weight. When you brush Holden's hair, the hair was just falling right off. And so the decision was made to put Holden to sleep. And we knew about this for about a month. And they had one final go riding Holden before Holden was put into retirement. And they did that, and Lise came home, and she just started bawling. It finally hit her. Like, why does Holden have to die? Why does anybody have to die? Why can't you just stay around forever? And it was very difficult to hear a kid talk about that. So this weekend on Sunday, my wife helped plan a goodbye to Holden, almost like a living funeral. We had a cake, we had cupcakes, we had, punch and all that stuff. And everybody that Holden had known was invited to come by and say goodbye to Holden. So the girls had their day. They got to take a last ride. They got to brush Holden. They braided a little bit of Holden's mane, and they cut it off so they could have it. We bought the girls these little necklaces, and in the necklace, which is very small, we put a picture of Holden in there so that whenever the girls want to see Holden, they're able to see Holden, and they have him next to their heart all the time. And yesterday at 2, they took Holden for like one final walk to graze a little bit, and they put Holden to sleep. And I'm not the one who stays at the barn when they go, but this was very difficult for me. Very difficult. And it took me a long time to get through why this is so difficult. And I had this conversation with my wife, and I think there's a lot of things in there, and this relates to alcoholism and recovery. I never cried when my mother passed away in 2018. I was very numb. But I've been crying all weekend over this horse. And I think there's part of that of not having the grieving of my mother. I knew my mom was going to die before. She had pancreatic cancer. So when I found out she had pancreatic cancer, I think a lot of the grieving happened then. But I didn't cry after the fact. And there's a lot of where I'm very empathetic and those emotions from the girls, and going to see Holden and petting Holden's head and Holden looking at me, and that feeling of, do you know what's coming? Are you afraid? And also this feeling of, I don't know how I feel about the afterlife. I don't know if I fully, this is a conversation I have with my wife of, I don't know if I'm a believer today of the afterlife. And my wife most certainly is. And so it's this feeling of, we're taking Holden's life and there's nowhere else for Holden. It's this sad ending. And I realized, like, this is a recovery topic. I think this is some stuff that people can relate to. And also, I am shocked how my emotions are all over the place. Like we were talking about this ahead of time, and I was as measured as possibly could. And I started talking about this, and I got tears in my eyes again. And I don't remember that level of up and down before I got sober. I'm curious your thoughts and maybe any of your experience with stuff like this.
Yeah, it's man, there is a lot to unpack there. So many things. We talked about it briefly before we came on the air and even last night a little bit. But, I've had similar experiences where I've lost two siblings and both parents. And I certainly grieved and cried. But through the process, I don't know. Part of it was I never felt like I grieved properly, or there was something wrong with it. And I, at that time, I knew they were going to pass. All of those, all four of them, and then my mother-in-law included, right? Actually, so 5 of them. I knew they were going to pass. I was part of their care they were getting as they transition to death. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe the fact that I was part of that helped me. But I said this to you last night. When I've put my dogs down, I have sobbed heavier than I did for these people, it seems like. And it feels like it hurt more. And I knew the dogs. The dogs didn't die. They didn't get hit by a car. We put them down. Just like you said, we euthanized them. It was their time to go. But there's something about an animal, first of all, right? So Holden the horse, about that unconditional connection that you have, right? That unconditional love when you have it with dogs. And I'm sure if you're a horse person, you can feel that same connection with horses. And I'm sure your daughters do at 9 and 10 years old.
They have pictures of their horses all over the room. There's a big picture of Holden on Annelyse's side of the room.
I am sure, because that's the age. When you start talking about what age you should get a child, a dog, it's that age. It's that 9, 10-year-old. Because they're able to have some responsibility and do some of the work about taking care of it. So at that age, they can be very connected to the animals. So at that age, like you said, they go, they brush, they clean out stalls, they feed, they ride, they do everything. They're taking care of this. They're taking care of this animal. So it's difficult for them. And then one of the hardest things I've ever done as a parent is watch my kids suffer and cry. Emotional distress, watch them go through some traumatic thing where they struggled and to be powerless over not being able to fix that for them, right? I don't want my kids. I'd much rather have me hold that pain than watch my kids. Although I know it's natural, right, and everybody needs to do it. So that's the other thing that, again, it's a heartbreaking. I can still remember situations where both of my kids went through breakups or lost a friend, right? My daughter lost a friend to our disease, and I've talked about it. At the time, 26 years old, maybe, a person who I was trying to find the rooms, couldn't, and a young lady who slept over my house many times, who sat in my back seat, talked to my kids. I would listen to them. And when that young lady died, it was a punch in the gut. It was like just watching my daughter go through that and the pain. And she knows all about this disease. She, with me, I'm very open with her. She knew she couldn't do anything to help her. That doesn't change it. It's a whole bunch of stuff. And here's the thing for me when it comes down to, like, how does this relate to our alcoholism? I would drink. I would drink during that, right? I mean, if I had felt that much pain, and again, I just want to back up and just a little bit of the story, right? My sister died of pancreatic cancer in May of 2009, and I was on the road to a relapse, okay? It was coming. It had been coming for a couple of years for me. I picked up and relapsed in October of 2009. And there's a direct connection. My sister had nothing to do with that. Her death had nothing to do with it. But it was one of the little chinks in that armor where I was like, fuck this, man. I'm done. Yeah. No, really. I was like, just like I'm done with God, right? He just took a 45-year-old with 2 young kids at home and, 3 kids, but 2 young kids. I was done. I was pretty angry at that time. And a few months later, I picked up and relapsed. And like I said, the relapse was coming anyway, but that sort of helped me along. And that's what I want to do when I feel that pain, right? I want to drink.
I dove into a bowl of ice cream.
Yeah, well,
That's
that
my
works
drug
too.
now.
Yeah, no, that works too. So, just a lot there. It's a slow. The nice thing is we can recognize it. You can talk about it, right? I mean, you went to a meeting last night. You brought it up.
I did not want to go to that meeting last night. I was in no mood,
right?
But I went anyways. Yeah. I'm glad I went because this little meeting we have that depopulated now seems to be the meeting where the new people are showing up.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah. My wife asked me, she goes, how'd the meeting go last night? My wife never asked me about my meetings. Never. How'd the meeting go last night? I'm like, meeting was great last night. And I told him, like, we got 2 new people showing up. I'm like, that's what makes it worthwhile. I said, Matt and I talk about it. Like, that's why we have that meeting. We've talked about that on this podcast.
Yep.
Why do we have a meeting when only 4 people show up? Because we had 2 new people show up last night. And one of them had called up, one of the guys who started attending this meeting and said, I need a meeting in the worst way. So, and when we hear that in our line of business, that is why I show up there every week, so that those guys know. And then the other guy, it was interesting. I was talking to one of the guys when we leave, and I had picked up for the meeting, and I said that it was story night last night out of the big book, and it talked about somebody who started drinking at 15 and being new and not fitting in, and there's a brand new guy who is fresh into AA.
Less than 24 hours sober, he said.
Right, not even, right. He didn't even take a 24-hour chip because he was not yet 24 hours sober.
Right.
Think about that. And you could tell. I mean, I picked up on him right away, and he, and it just like, our story talks about this. The story talked about this guy not wanting to be part of, and then this guy wanted to sit outside of our little circle, and I just got him a book and like, hey, why don't you join us inside the circle? So hopefully we'll see him again, right? We don't know. We never know if these people are going to show back up, but hopefully we'll see him again. But getting back to the topic is I would drink over those situations. I drank not to feel these feelings. If I felt like I was going to cry over something, or if I felt pain over my kids, I would be drinking if I could, but I can't.
I shouldn't say I drink. I drank when I was too happy, because there was almost a feeling when things were too good that I was getting out of my skin. It was uncomfortable to be too up. So those moments where things were really, really good, I would have to drink to bring myself down. Yeah. But the drinking when things were bad, well, that's just something you have to do too.
Yeah.
To make yourself feel better. but you're not really feeling those things. The other thing is, and this felt a lot like new sobriety, where the emotions were all over the place and not controllable in any way. If you're brand new and you're starting to feel these emotions coming from nowhere, and you go from laughing to crying in 30 seconds, nothing's wrong. You have suppressed all of that with alcohol for a long, long time. And Roger Ebert said it best when it's like you take a balloon and you put it under the water in the bathtub and you let it go. And that's how my emotions have felt. All of that with empathy for my girls. But I had a conversation about God. So it's not that I'm angry at God. There's not like anger there. Here's where I run into problems with a higher power, is I overthink it. I think this whole, and I had this conversation of, my wife mentioned, I guess I'll back up. My wife mentioned that it took her about 5 years to grieve her mother. And in that time, she was crazy as a loon, very anxious and very difficult to be around. And that was when I first got sober. So it's meshed with, she never really took the time to grieve her mother. And then I got sober all at that time. And she was incredibly difficult to deal with. She was incredibly, you never know when you're going to get not so nice Penny. And when she was not so nice, it was not so nice. And you never knew. You could see it building, but when she flipped a switch, it was tough. And she went and got therapy, and she took care of it and got past it and is a whole different person. But she said, think about what I went through. You know, a lot of it could be about your mom. And I don't know. I don't know if it's tied to that. But I definitely know it's tied to lack of a belief in an afterlife. And this is a lot of, I start thinking it through, it feels silly that there's an afterlife. I mean, are we just collecting people since caveman times up in heaven? Do animals get to go up there? And if you have eternal life, why do you have suffering here? Why do you have this life here to do all this stuff if you're going to end up there? I start thinking through on a granular level of what that must look like, and then I end up telling myself, well, it must be stupid. We're a worm feast when we die. And then I think about that with Holden, and that his 29 years are there, and now he's gone. I think the other part is, when it comes to putting animals down, it's one thing if they pass away naturally, but we have to make that decision. And there's that thought of, did we make the right decision?
Yeah.
That was something we had to do with my mother-in-law, that we had to make the decision. She had a stroke. She went home. She was home for 3 or 4 months. She fell. She hit her head, which would have left a bruise on you and me. But because she was on Coumadin, she bled out, and it caused a bleeding stroke, and she pretty much was a vegetable at that point. So we had to make that decision, and, you know, as we pulled all the plugs, she was looking at her husband, she was crying, and my mom thought, did we do the right thing? Is she trying to tell us, I don't want this. I still want to be alive. And I think that's the piece of, we're killing this person, we're killing this animal. Are we doing it at the right time? Should we be doing this to this animal? There's that piece too.
Yeah, tough choices. You know, if you live long enough, and you may have to make some of those choices. We've had to make them. We had a very similar situation with my dad. My dad had a stroke. My dad had dementia, and my dad he was a very difficult patient in his nursing home. Wouldn't stay in bed, and he had diabetes, so he had a sore on the foot. He was not in good shape, and he slipped and fell, went in the hospital, and we made a similar decision not to keep him alive. Those are things I never struggled with. Like, I didn't struggle with that decision for my dad because I knew what his life was going to be like. Right? I mean, he didn't know who we were at the time. It just wasn't going to be a pleasant. It wasn't going to be pleasant. And again, this is maybe a whole nother topic, but my wife and I talk about these things all the time, and neither one of us want to be in that situation. And with the animals, my wife has always said that it's the gift that we could give our animals, is that we don't have to let them suffer, right? If they have physical suffering, or if they have cancer, or our last Golden had, I'm sure, probably a cancerous tumors, and was having seizures and stuff like that. Like, we don't have to let them continue to suffer until they waste away and die. We can go up there and peacefully put them down. It is very peaceful. I mean, I've done it with 2 dogs now, and it's very peaceful for them once they get the medicine and they calm them down and all. It's not so peaceful for me, but like I said, it was heartbreaking for me because they were so good. And I told you this last night. I have a golden retriever right now that just will turn 7 next month. God, it's going to be tough. I just know right now. She's the sweetest dog I've ever had. It'll be really, really tough. But again, going back to the drinking stuff, one of the things we know is the best thing about this, Matt, is that we have a place to bring it, right?
Right.
I mean, this is the whole point, right? Like, why are we talking about it? I can see somebody say, why are you talking about this? Well, here's why we're talking about it. Is that when it comes up, like, you didn't want to go to the meeting last night, but you went to the meeting, and you talked about this situation, which I always tell people, you share on the situation or you share on what you need to share on. And you did the second yesterday. You shared on what you needed to share on, which was this topic. Listen, here's what's going on with me. I just have this feeling. I'm struggling. I'm sad. I'm crying. And you let the group know where you were, right? Now, listen, if you didn't have this, yeah, you might talk to Penny about it, right? But the other, if you were still drinking, you might say something to Penny. You may not say something to Penny, but you'd probably handle it by drinking.
Yes.
And today we don't have to do that.
Or if I had Vicodin, I definitely would take a Vicodin.
Right. Or you will absolutely. Or
because I wouldn't care after that.
Or an Ativan or whatever you might be taking at the time. Right. No question about it. And that's not to say that people who need those type of, medications should not take them. I don't want to ever tell people who need something like that not to take it. But for me,
you don't need Vicodin for emotional pain.
No, you don't. No, I know. But Ativan, you maybe might help you through that situation. But those aren't drugs that I take, or those aren't drugs that I want to take. And I don't want to. I'd rather feel my emotions today. I would. I'd rather feel my emotions. I'd rather deal with them, and I'd rather work through them. And I just want to touch base on your, it's something I've been sharing a lot about. My wife and I talked about this morning, matter of fact, is this whole afterlife thing. It's like, I too have gotten to the point where right now it just doesn't make any sense to me. I've done a lot of reading on it. I've been a, person who's had a, born up, raised Christian, believed in that, and Jesus and heaven, and all those things. And today I don't. I really don't. And I will tell you, and I've shared this before, and I've shared it at a meeting recently, it has created a hole that I haven't figured out yet. I don't know. I mean, I have some ideas how to work through it, but I haven't gotten there yet. And it does, and I think that could be something, like you said, that could be part of your struggle.
It's like, a big part of it.
Right. That, okay, what happens now? And again, it feels like, how we all feel about where death falls in everything. Just, it's my own opinion. It's my own take on it. But I think death is part of living. I really do. I think it's part of that process, right? We end up, we live, and then we all get to this point where we're going to die. I just don't see it as a horrible thing for someone, for a 29-year-old horse, which I would guess is a fairly old horse.
It's a fairly old horse.
Right. I always say, like, somebody gets to be, I read obituaries of 90-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And they'll say they died after a short illness. And I'm like, no, they died because they're 90. Right? Really, like their body was, their body couldn't handle that short illness. Not because the illness killed, they were 90. They were done. They were done. My mother-in-law was 90 when she died. She died of congested heart failure, but she died because she was 90. She had congested heart failure when she was, it was failing when she was 80, but it didn't kill her because she was 80, not 90. Anyway, but the whole thing is how we process death. And to me, it's not a scary thing. And again, maybe that'll change when I'm at death's door. I don't know. I won't know until I get there. But if I have enough, if I'm given the chance to understand that I'm actually going to die and don't die suddenly, then I'll see how I address it then. But I think I'll feel the same way.
I don't feel so good about death.
No?
And I think it more has to do with seeing my own life slip away and not having accomplished enough.
Yeah, that's true.
I am constantly feeling regret of haven't done enough in my career, haven't done enough in my life. I don't stop and be present.
Well, like I say to my buddy Mike when he starts saying those things, Matt, I have a program that could help you with that.
No, I know this is definitely alcoholism related.
Right, absolutely.
The alcoholism mindset.
Yeah.
And my wife turned to me. She goes, maybe doing what you do with the podcast is the reason you're here. That maybe you can get one person sober doing this show. Maybe you don't know, because she talked about Holden. Like, Holden touched all these lives. For a 29-year-old horse, Holden lived an extraordinary life. Just how he's touched my girls and our family. And she said, maybe you are touching lives doing what you're doing and you'll never know. And I look at that, I'm like, wow, that would be wonderful. But there's all of these feelings are all alcohol related. And she has a strong faith. And she says, I feel my mom's presence all the time. Sometimes I feel my grandmother's presence.
Yeah.
My daughter, when she was much younger, Addison, would have conversations with Rhoda looking at the picture. And she'd be responding back in ways that Rhoda would actually talk. And she'd never met Rhoda. And she would say things. We had a family friend watch her and one day, and she said, you know, my Grammy loves to give me kisses and hugs. And my Grammy wants to tell you something. She goes, what? My Grammy said, you have to give me kisses and hugs too. Like little things like that. And she doesn't remember it. But there are those things that it was very clear to us. There's some type of connection there that she knows things she shouldn't, that she has no reason to. And I'm so jealous of my wife's faith in that.
There's a comfort in that. There's no question about it. And it's one of the things. It's one of the things that that I struggle with. I'm at this place where I don't believe in a lot of that stuff. The way I put it, I don't believe in the supernatural, if you will. And I do look at people who have that. I was talking to somebody last night about it, and he was talking about how he's been told that he needs to get on his knees and pray, and he's like, I've never been that person, and neither have I. Which is amazing, being that I was brought up Catholic, is I certainly would pray on my knees in church and all that kind of stuff. But even at home, I was never a get on my knees and pray person. And even in recovery, I never felt like it never felt right to me. And a lot of people swear by it. And one of the things I said this, again, some of these conversations, I don't know why they've been coming up with my wife and I said, it's like one of those things that I'm sort of lost at right now. We talk about it, right? In our program. And other people say, if you're struggling with something, pray on it. Well, if I don't believe in the afterlife, if I don't believe in the supernatural, if I don't believe in a God, there's no reason to pray. So when I'm feeling uncomfortable, and this is one of the things I have to work through, how do I deal with it? And I'll tell you right now, I don't have an answer to that. I deal with it like you're dealing with it. I talk to other alcoholics. That's how I deal with it today. I bring it up at meetings, or I bring it up one-on-one, and I talk to other alcoholics about it.
There's a lot of stubbornness in me with this, with sometimes praying. I know I can't put my finger on it, but I can feel the stubbornness that I'm not doing it almost out of spite. There's something about it that if I'm sitting there praying and there is no God, then I'm being foolish. My wife asked me, should we start going to church? Is there a church you feel more connected? I'm like, no, definitely not the Catholic Church. There are other churches I'd like to go to, I don't feel connected. The rote nature of a church service bothers me. The Catholic Church really bothers me because it feels like the rote actions that you take of stand up, sit down, kneel, chant at this time, sing at this time. Everybody gets up, they get the wafer, they go sit down. That those motions that you take are more important than the spirituality you get out. This is my own opinion. If you're a good Catholic, God bless you. I am jealous of you. This is just how I feel. And it feels that way in other places. I do feel more spiritually connected at an AA meeting. There are times that I have felt the presence of God. So I have less of an issue with, I definitely have a belief in some type of higher power. It's the disconnect to an afterlife. That's my issue.
Yeah, I get that, and I mean it. And that, I've toyed. I've talked about it on this. I've toyed with some Buddhism stuff, and in Buddhism, they do believe in an afterlife of some sort, but not sort of a place like a heaven. And some of those things are very comforting to me. I don't know. It's a weird place. But here's what I've talked about it. I talked about it at Joe and Charlie's. Joe and Charlie years ago taught me something that I bought into. And they said early on, and I remember hearing it, it's in the seeking, it's not in the finding. And what they were talking about was, which as you seek your higher power, as you seek that power that's greater than yourself, whether you call it higher power or God or whatever, as you try to figure that out in your program or in your life, it's the seeking part of it, as that's the powerful, rather than the finding part. And when I heard that, I believed it. So that's what started me on this path of checking things out and reading different stuff and playing around with a little bit of Buddhism and trying to figure out, like, okay, what do I believe in? Because I grew up Catholic and I don't believe in that anymore. And then I went to an Episcopalian. For most of my adult life, I was in the Episcopal Church. A little bit better than Catholic, but still the same. The same stuff. It's like I've decided to go on this journey, and I talked about it years ago, like I'm on a spiritual journey. I don't know where it's going to bring me. I don't know where I'm going to end up, but that's what I'm doing. So that's why I'm comfortable being at a place where I could say, I don't believe in a heaven. Right now, I don't believe in a God, at least a God that I understood to be as my childhood God. And that leaves me in a place where I don't know what to do with certain things. But I also know that I'm not done. I'm not done seeking. I'm not done trying to figure this stuff out. It's not like, okay, I'm done with this. I wipe my hands on it and I go on. No, I keep working on it. I keep going to meetings. I sit next to people. I sit next to people who are very spiritual in every meeting. Like, these people have powerful spiritual connections. Right.
Yeah. What if they figured out that I haven't?
Right. My buddy Mike, our buddy Mike, who I bring to meetings, is a diehard Catholic boy. Right. The good old Irish Catholic boy.
He enjoys going to church.
And he loves going to church. He loves going to church. And there was a time in my life that I loved going to church.
Me too.
And if there was a time Mike broke his ankle and he couldn't. Mike walks to church pretty much. But now he has a friend picking up. For a long time, Mike was walking to church. Mike doesn't drive, and he asked me, "Can I used to pick up Mike almost every week and take him to church, and drop him off, and then pick him up, and I've got no use for the Catholic Church, but it's his connection, and I am 100% okay. He tells me all the time, "Hey Steve, I'll pray for you." And I say, "Great, Mike. I need all the prayers you can give me." I tease him all the time. "Did you pray for me this week, Mike?" He goes, "I pray for you every day, Steve." I'm like, "Great, Mike. I need it. Just in case." Just in case, I want you to pray for me.
And Mike has the affection and loyal, and I mean this in the nicest way. Mike has the affection and loyalty of a pet, of my dogs.
Absolutely.
That's the best way to describe him. And I do not mean that in any negative way.
No, I agree.
You become Mike's friend. He has the simplicity of his emotion back that it feels like how your dog looks at you when you come home.
No, Mike has taught me, I mean this honestly, Mike has taught me so much about gratitude and compassion and friendship and all of those things. And it's one of those things like, you can learn lessons in strange places. And when I started hanging around with Mike, trust me, I didn't think, if you had asked me early on, my ego would have said, there's not a thing Mike could teach me. There's not a thing. I'm sure I could help Mike, but there's not a thing Mike can teach me. And luckily, that's not true. I really, listen, I'm getting up early tomorrow morning. Mike's got a doctor's appointment, and I'm taking to a doctor's appointment because I like doing stuff for him. I like helping him out.
He will give such gratitude as well. What a grateful person for anything you do to him, for him.
Yep, I agree. So
I want to share a review. We finally got a review. So this is thank you. It's 5 stars. Grateful. Al-Anon. I love the fact that we have an Al-Anon listener in Kansas City. Thank you for being here and for doing this. I just love this podcast. I've gone all the way back to the beginning, and I've listened to every single episode. I'm so glad I did. So much good stuff. This is Lisa from Kansas City, Missouri. Lisa, thank you so much. We love hearing your feedback. Please go to Apple. Give us, if you think we deserve 5 stars, give us 5 stars and a review. I read every single one of them. A rating on Spotify. You can find us on Instagram at Sober Friends Pod. Our website is soberfriendspod.com, where you can connect directly with the show. I hope this talk of a higher power and loss and emotions, it wasn't about a horse. It was about more than that. And I'm willing to share my raw emotion with you because if it helps one person, it makes it worthwhile. Steve, thanks for being my shoulder tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Glad to be here.
We will see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.